The air in the probate courtroom was thick and still, tasting of old wood and older laws. I watched my father, Arthur, a retired Army major whose entire identity was built on the shine of his own medals. He stood before the judge, a mask of practiced concern on his face, but his eyes held the familiar glint of condescension he always reserved for me. He gestured in my direction, a flick of the wrist that dismissed my entire existence. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "she's never held a real job in her life. She is fundamentally unreliable." I kept my hands clasped in my lap, my posture perfect, my breathing even. Just like I was trained. The judge, a man in his late 60s with a face carved from granite, peered at my father over the top of his glasses. His gaze dropped to a single sealed envelope on his bench, then returned to my father, colder this time. His voice cut through the silence, quiet but absolute. "Sir, this court has reviewed your daughter's service record, submitted in camera." He let the legal term hang in the air. "According to the Department of the Navy, her 12 years of service were classified." He paused, and in that silence I saw the first crack in my father's composure. "As a naval special warfare operative," the judge continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "A SEAL." The words landed like a physical blow. My father's face, once so smug, went slack. The color drained from it, leaving behind a waxy pale sheen of disbelief. The world stopped breathing. It had all started 2 months earlier, in the sterile quiet of a lawyer's office. The air was thick with the scent of paper and unresolved grief as my mother's will was read. When the lawyer announced that she had named me as the sole executor of her estate, my father erupted. He launched into a tirade about my irresponsibility, my lack of a stable career, and my unfitness to manage her legacy. Each word was a familiar stone, worn smooth from years of being thrown at me. He saw my quiet life, the gaps in my resume, and saw failure. He didn't see the 24-hour watches, the covert safe houses he mistook for house-sitting, or the international travel that was anything but a whim. He turned to the lawyer, his voice loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "She can't even manage her own life. What does she even do? It's a joke." The insult wasn't just another cut, it was a formal declaration of war. He had taken his private narrative of my failure and submitted it as a public fact. He saw an unemployed daughter living off odd jobs. He had no idea he was talking about a ghost, a woman whose real life was buried under layers of national security. To understand how his words in a lawyer's office led to his total humiliation in a federal courtroom, you have to understand the two worlds I lived in, and the oath of silence that governed them both. To my father, my life was a collection of blank spaces, unexplained absences, and long periods of silence he filled with his own disappointing narratives. He couldn't see the truth, so he invented a fiction he could understand, one where I was the aimless drifter, and he was the patriarch burdened by a daughter who refused to grow up. This story, he told himself, and everyone else, was never more potent than at Christmas. I remember one from about 5 years ago, the house smelling of pine and roasting turkey, a perfect picture of holiday warmth that always felt hollow. I was home on a rare 72-hour leave, the kind of brief appearance that only reinforced his narrative. Arthur was holding court by the fireplace, nursing a glass of scotch and retelling a story about his time as a logistics officer stationed in Germany. It was his favorite anecdote, a tale of bureaucratic cunning that, in his mind, was tantamount to battlefield heroics. I had heard it at least 20 times. Desperate to connect, to offer some small piece of my real life, I mentioned that I'd just come from a particularly difficult high-altitude training course. He paused his story, looked at me, and gave me a slow, placating smile before patting me on the head like a child. "That's nice, dear," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, like a little adventure camp. "Good for you." Then he turned away, his attention immediately shifting to my younger brother, Leo, a kind soul who had long ago learned that agreeing with my father was the path of least resistance. He clapped Leo on the shoulder, booming, "Now, your brother here just got a promotion at his firm, senior accountant. That's a real career, son. Something you can build on. The room filled with applause. I just stood there, the pat on my head still burning. In that moment, I didn't just see Leo's promotion. I saw every dismissive comment, every ignored achievement, every time my life was measured against a conventional yardstick and found wanting. It was the heavy, familiar weight of being fundamentally misunderstood by the one person who should have been proudest. He called it a little adventure camp. The reality was the screaming roar of a C-130's engines at 25,000 feet. It was the biting, lung-searing cold of the upper atmosphere, so thin it felt like breathing glass. My adventure camp was a halo jump, high altitude, low opening, into a region so hostile it didn't officially appear on any maps. I wasn't a camper, I was the team's lead communications specialist, the one responsible for the fragile, encrypted thread that connected us to the world. A single miscalculation, a moment of lost signal during our descent, and we wouldn't just be lost. We would be erased. My hands, numb with cold, moved with practiced precision over the equipment, checking the integrity of our comms encryption one last time as we approached the drop zone. The jump light turned green. We went out into the black, silent void, falling for what felt like an eternity before. Our chutes deployed with a bone-jarring crack just a few hundred feet above the ground. After we landed and secured the perimeter, my commanding officer did a quick gear check on each of us. He stopped in front of me, his face hidden in shadow, and gave me a single sharp nod. It was a silent, profound acknowledgement. It said, "I trust you with my life. You did your job." That simple gesture from a man I barely knew held more respect and validation than I had ever received from my own father in my entire life. Living this way, it takes a toll. I spent my life in sterile, temporary apartments between deployments, places with no photos on the walls, no personality, no roots. Ghost homes for a ghost. I would sit in the silence, staring at a picture of my family on my phone, and feel a chasm open up inside me. I couldn't share my triumphs. I couldn't explain my fears. I couldn't talk about the scars, both visible and invisible, or the friends whose names were now etched onto memorial walls. The silence was a requirement of the job, a vow I took to protect the missions and the people I served with. It was a matter of honor. But my father's lawsuit had twisted that silence. He had taken my duty and reframed it as delinquency. He used my inability to speak as proof of my incompetence. My honor had been turned into a weapon and aimed directly at my head, and he was the one pulling the trigger. He saw my life as a blank page, and he was determined to write his own ending for me, one where I was worthless, one where I was nothing. My father believed honor was something you displayed in a glass case for the world to see. I was taught that true honor was what you did when no one was watching. He was about to learn that the things done in the shadows have a way of coming to light, especially when you drag them into a court of law. After my lawyer handed me the official petition, I read through my father's words. Unstable, undocumented employment, a transient lifestyle unbecoming of an executor. Every phrase was a carefully chosen dart, designed to paint me as a failure. My lawyer looked at me with pity, expecting tears or an outburst of anger. But he didn't get one. Years of training kicked in, pushing the hurt and the rage into a small, cold box in the back of my mind. The situation was no longer a family drama, it was a threat assessment. The objective was clear. I looked up from the papers and said, "He's right. My employment is undocumented, so we need to document it." This was not going to be an emotional battle. It was going to be a procedural one. That evening I made a call. It wasn't to a friend or a family member, but through a secure encrypted channel I hadn't used in months. I was routed to the Navy's Judge Advocate General's Corps, the legal arm of the service. I explained the situation in cold, clinical terms, a civilian subpoena regarding a classified service record in a probate case. I was put in touch with Commander Jackson, a JAG officer with a reputation for being razor-sharp and fiercely protective of his people. He didn't need the backstory. He simply understood the impossible position I was in. Commander Jackson outlined the protocol. There would be no declassification of state secrets, no revealing of operational details. Instead, his office would prepare a service abstract, It was a sanitized summary, a document that would confirm my branch, my 12 years of continuous service, my special warfare designation, and a list of any unclassified commendations. Everything else, the locations, the mission names, the very nature of my work, would be covered in thick black lines of redaction. The document would be sealed and delivered by a military courier directly to the judge, for his eyes only. The trap was being set, and my father was walking right into it. In a pre-trial hearing, my lawyer formally notified the court of our intent to submit this evidence. My father's lawyer actually laughed, calling it a desperate and theatrical stunt from a daughter with nothing to hide and even less to show. From across the room, I saw my father smirk, leaning over to whisper something to his lawyer. They saw a bluff, an empty hand played with dramatic flair. They couldn't imagine the weight of the truth hidden beneath those black lines. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They didn't realize they had pushed me onto my home turf, a world of rules, procedures, and non-negotiable authority. The hearing was set. The file was sealed. The trap was laid. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. The air was heavy, stagnant, and every small sound, a cough, the squeak of a shoe, was amplified in the tense silence. My father was on the witness stand, and he was in his element. He projected an air of weary authority, the long-suffering parent forced to air his child's dirty laundry for her own good. He spoke directly to the judge, but his words were for me, each one a polished stone in the monument to my failure he had been building my entire life. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and reasonable, look at her life. There's no mortgage, no property. She drifts from one sparse, rented apartment to another. As he spoke, my mind drifted. No mortgage. I thought of a sun-baked, mud-walled compound in a forgotten corner of the world, a place where I had lived for 6 months straight, sleeping on a cot and feeling more at home than I ever did in the house I grew up in. Sparse apartment. I thought of my go bag, always packed, always ready. I thought of how little you need, how little you want to own when your life can be uprooted by a single phone call in the middle of the night. He continued, his voice gaining momentum. Her visits home are sporadic, unpredictable. There's no stability, no foundation. She lacks the fundamental character to execute the responsibilities my late wife entrusted to her. Sporadic visits, a flash of memory, a mission that went dark for 3 weeks, the gnawing fear, the relief. So profound it felt like a physical rebirth when we finally made it to the exfil point. I thought of my friends, my teammates who never got another sporadic visit home at all. I held my father's gaze from across the room, my face a neutral mask, my heart a cold, steady drumbeat. He concluded, aiming the final, fatal blow right at the bench. She's useless. Never had a real job. The judge let the accusation hang in the air, allowing its full weight to settle over the room. He didn't look at me. He just watched my father for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he put on his reading glasses and picked up the sealed manila envelope. Mr. Reed, he began, his voice perfectly level. This court is in receipt of a document from the United States Navy, verifying your daughter's employment history. My father let out a short, sharp scoff, a sound of pure derision. The judge ignored it. It confirms 12 continuous years of active duty, he stated, his eyes scanning the page. It also confirms a salary and a pension that, I can assure you, make her more than financially solvent. He paused, lifting his gaze from the document to fix it directly on my father. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. It also confirms her occupation. This is where the judge's voice changed. The dispassionate legal tone fell away, replaced by something hard as steel. Your daughter's service was classified, he said, each word a chip of ice. The court recognizes her 12 years of service as a naval special warfare operative. He flipped a page in the file, the sound of the paper crisp and loud in the dead silence. A seal. The name dropped into the courtroom like a grenade. Everything stopped. My father froze, his smug expression melting away into a grotesque mask of slack-jawed shock. The judge wasn't finished. The abstract notes she was a team leader, he continued, his voice relentless, and a decorated one at that. While the specifics of her commendations are, of course, redacted, her record is, to use a civilian term, exemplary. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into my father. "Sir, you served. You know what that name means?" He finally sat back, his expression grim. "The motion to declare her incompetent is not just denied, it is dismissed with extreme prejudice." The gavel fell once. The sound cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. My father flinched as if he'd been struck. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. But I wasn't looking at him. For the first time, I didn't care about his reaction. My eyes were on the judge. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. He held my gaze and nodded back. In the gallery, I saw my brother Leo. His mouth was open, his face a canvas of disbelief and awe. He was looking at me as if for the first time, every memory of his drifting sister suddenly being rewritten in his mind. He was finally seeing the quiet intensity, the unexplained scars, the deep exhaustion for what they truly were. He was finally seeing me. My father had spent my entire life trying to define me by his standards. In the end, it only took one word from a stranger to reveal a truth he could never comprehend. As the judge adjourned the court, the room exhaled. The suffocating tension broke, replaced by a flurry of movement and muffled whispers. My father, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago, stumbled toward me through the crowd. His face was a wreck of confusion and shame. "Why?" he stammered, his hand reaching out for my arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at his hand, then at his face, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger, no desire for revenge, not even pity, just a profound sense of finality. I turned and walked away without a word. In the hallway, my brother Leo was waiting. He didn't try to make excuses for our father or for himself. He just looked at me, his eyes shining with a new, raw understanding. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was the simplest, most honest thing he had said to me in years, and it was more than enough. As I walked toward the courthouse exit, I glanced toward the judge's chambers. He was standing in the doorway, watching me leave. He caught my eye and gave me a crisp, respectful nod. That was the acknowledgement I had been searching for my whole life, not from a father who couldn't see me, but from a peer who could. 6 months later, I was home. Not just visiting, but truly home, in my mother's house. I had spent weeks clearing out the clutter, both physical and emotional, until the space felt calm, organized, and peaceful. It was mine now, a sanctuary I had earned the right to care for. I sat in her favorite armchair by the window, not surrounded by family, but on a video call with a venture capital firm in New York. I was pitching them my new business, a high-level security consulting firm. The skills I could never speak of, the instincts honed in the most dangerous places on earth, were now my greatest assets. I used their language, risk assessment, logistical oversight, strategic implementation, but they were just new words for old skills. I was translating a life lived in the shadows into a future built in the light. For so long, my father's narrative had defined me as someone who couldn't build anything. Now, I was laying the foundation for my own legacy, brick by painstaking brick, on my own terms. My past wasn't a liability to be hidden, it was the bedrock of my future. I was finally in command of my own story. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. It was the group chat with my old team. A flurry of messages had come in, mostly inside jokes and ruthless memes roasting our former company. Then, a message from my point man, a guy who had pulled me out of more than one tight spot. "Heard you finally decloaked for the civvies," it read. About time they knew who the real boss was. A genuine smile spread across my face, easy and relaxed. These were the people who had seen me at my worst and trusted me at my best. They were the family I had chosen, the one forged in shared sacrifice and unconditional respect. Later that week, an email arrived. The subject line was simply my name. It was from my father. I hesitated for a long moment before opening it. It was exactly what I expected, a rambling, pathetic attempt at an apology, filled with justifications and pleas for me to understand his position. It was all about him. At the very end, he had written the 5 words I had once desperately longed to hear. "I'm proud of you." I read them over and over, waiting to feel something. A spark of warmth, a flicker of forgiveness. But there was nothing. They were just words, delivered years too late, from a man who was proud of a headline, not a daughter. His validation was a currency I no longer traded in. With a calm sense of finality, I moved the email to my archive folder without replying. My peace was no longer his to give or take away. It was mine. My father thought legacy was the name you leave behind. I learned it's the quiet work you do when no one knows your name at all. If you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, share your story below. In this community, your true service is always recognized.